So thanks everyone for joining us here today. Today is a special session of our usual social science subcommittee meeting, and it's National Estuaries Week this week. So we thought we would make this meeting all about social science going on in estuaries across the country to talk about, things that we're doing. Other programs are in different stages of implementing social science. Some of us are in the very beginning and kind of starting out, so we can talk about, things that we are working on and during the early stages, while other folks have been doing this for a longer time, so they have more insights to share about what's going on in their watershed. And so we have several speakers today from New York and Washington and California, and of course here in Tampa Bay. And so we'll be talking about all of our experiences and the things that we have going on here. And I will get us just started out. At our last social science subcommittee meeting, I had gone over with everyone the plans for our big Tampa Bay community survey. And we got a lot of feedback from folks that are on this call, as well as folks that aren't able to join from the subcommittee. And now I'm here to basically show you some of the preliminary results. So we are still getting return surveys in the mail from folks. And so I've just put together some preliminary results that we've collected from last Thursday. So these are all just going to be things that I've been able to put together in the last 5 days or so. They're not final by any means, but they'll give you an idea of basically what the outlook is. And so just a refresher, why we're doing this survey in the first place is that we have our comprehensive conservation and management plan for Tampa Bay that outlines a lot of our goals and specific actions for improving the state of the bay here. And within these, there's a lot of the human dimensions that are covered. We have goals and actions around public involvement in restoration and protection. It's also important for us to be able to increase public education about the state of the bay. We want to provide access to recreate within the bay responsibly. And of course, even these sort of ecological goals that we have, things like adapting to climate change, reducing nitrogen runoff, increasing green infrastructure, reducing propeller scars, and increasing biodiversity, all of those have a social component to them. And we really need a mechanism for tracking some of this social data that can inform how we're doing on these various goals related to the human dimensions of conservation and restoration here in Tampa Bay. And so that's how we created the Tampa Bay Community Survey. Our goal was to develop a long-term survey to monitor the social and cultural changes in Tampa Bay that can assist us with achieving our CCNP goals. This is going to be run every 2 years with an ideal sample size of at least 1,000 people or more throughout our watershed. And as I mentioned, we just launched this back in August. And here are some of the things that the survey includes. It includes questions to gauge what it is that they know about the state of the bay. So we asked them some kind of trivia questions about the trends that we're seeing, some of the sources and stressors in the bay. We also asked them about what they think, so different measures of their attitudes, perceptions of environmental justice, how they feel, so looking at things like nature relatedness, place identity, solastalgia, hope, and even their mental health and well-being. We also want to know what they want, so what are their priorities for their community? And these can range from environmental priorities, social services, infrastructure, or priorities about the economy. And then we also want to know what they do. There's different types of activities around active or passive nature engagement, as well as measures of social engagement,
Hello.
so capital, as well
Good.
as their different pro-environmental behaviors. And so basically what I'll be focusing on today is the results that we got in, I think I stopped collecting around Thursday of last week, But we do have two kind of different audiences that we sent the survey out to, one of them being just the general public. So we hired a market research company to distribute our online survey to 1,000 or so residents throughout the watershed that's in their online panel. And then we supplemented that with additional mail-out versions of the survey to random addresses that are within some of our underserved and overburdened communities that we know likely are going to be underrepresented in those kinds of online research panels. We then also sent an equivalent but separate version of the survey to people within our own networks here at the Estuary program. So these could be people that either are partners of ours, so they work for municipal or county governments, maybe they work for nonprofits or NGOs that are heavily involved with us, or maybe they're just individuals that have worked with us from our Bay Mini grants or in our community advisory committee or things like that. And so we got an additional sample of 178 folks that are somewhere within those networks. And we want to distinguish these two because we know that folks that are currently within our network may not be representative of the general population when it comes to their attitudes and environmental priorities and things like that. And here's a snapshot of the distribution for the public participants that we got. You can see that we have a pretty good spread throughout our watershed when it comes to the zip code hotspots you see here. We also did ask
Blake, I'm so
them
sorry. We're not seeing your slides
oh no.
or at least I'm not. Maybe it's just.
I can still see them.
Yeah, I
Oh.
can see.
I think it's just you.
Here,
I'm
I can
sorry for interrupting.
let me try stop sharing and then I can restart just in case. I'll stop share and then retry. Let's see, can you see it now, Kyle? Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
Great. And so, yeah, this is the spread that we have. As I was saying, we did also ask an optional question to have participants say what their nearest street intersection was. And we use this a lot in past surveys that I've done, and usually it has a good response rate. Here we have over 60% of people did give us a street intersection that we could verify on the ground. More people gave us responses, but some of them, some people don't know what the nearest street intersection is, or maybe they're just not very good at spelling. And so it's difficult to verify them. But we did get about 60% of them that gave us the street intersections, so we can really zero in on specific neighborhoods for a lot of these folks and dive further into the geographic implications of their responses. But I'll just go through and highlight some of the key results that we have. First up is about what they know. So one of the questions that we asked them was, in the last 5 years, water quality in Tampa Bay overall has declined, improved, or remained about the same. Now, the technical answer here is improved. That is what our data shows us. But you can see here that that is not what most people believe. Very few people actually believe that water quality in Tampa Bay has improved in the last 5 years. The majority of people, especially within our own network, believe that it has declined. And we also asked them for each of these responses how confident they were in their answer. We wanted to be able to disentangle the people that completely guessed out of just nowhere and got it right versus the people that answered and they know that they were right. And so 80%, on average, people were 80% confident in our networks that water quality in Tampa Bay has declined versus 75% in the general public. Now, this question we are going to give people grace for, because even this question overall was a bit of a tricky one for us, even in our own staff, to agree upon an answer for this, right? Because it all depends on timelines that you're thinking of, 5 years versus 10 years versus 20 years. What metrics, what if they don't align well? So you're saying, oh, water quality is good according to this, but not so good according to that. So we do give grace with people for this answer, but it really helps us to understand what the public and people within our network are thinking. And so then that leads to us thinking about how do we change our messages, or how do we think about better crafting our messages to the public? You know, if we really want them to know that water quality isn't so bad as you think, we are doing better. We don't want everyone to sort of have this sort of panic in their mentality, right? So this will be important for us going forward to track exactly what people think is going on with the state of the Bay. Another question we asked is, what is the biggest contributor to poor water quality in Tampa Bay? And this one we have less grace. For folks, nitrogen is the biggest contributor to poor water quality in our area. And people within our network, the majority of them got this answer correct. And they were fairly confident, 76% on average. Whereas the public, most of them thought that phosphorus was the big thing for us. And that may actually be a big indicator of people's reference points still to the Piney Point spill that happened back in 2021. So Piney Point is a phosphate processing facility that had a spill back in, I think it was March of 2021. And it was big news, and people are still talking about it today. And it's still a lot of people's frame of reference when it comes to thinking about water quality in the Bay. So this may be a sign of people still referencing that single incident, or it may also be a sign of folks that live predominantly out of state for most of their lives, where maybe phosphorus was the big issue in their communities out of state that they lived in. So this is helpful for us when thinking about talking about nitrogen specifically in Tampa Bay. We asked them what the main source of nutrient pollution is in Tampa Bay, and very happy to see that the vast majority of people within our network know that it is stormwater runoff. Stormwater runoff contributes over 60% to the nutrient pollution in Tampa Bay. Stormwater runoff was one of the most popular answers in the public, so that's pretty good, but they weren't very confident about it. On average, 60% confident in choosing that answer. And then this last question here, we asked them, to reduce the risk of nutrient pollution to the Bay, what time of year should someone avoid applying fertilizer to their lawn or garden? And so this is a big one for us. We have a lot of ordinances that specifically say it cannot fertilize during the rainy season, during the summer here in Tampa Bay. And very happy to see that almost all people within our network know not to fertilize during the summer, but also the majority of the public also knows not to fertilize in the summer. But that said, they're not particularly as confident as those within our network, only an average of 63% confidence. But this is good that at least they have the inclination that summer is the time where they shouldn't be fertilizing. And this helps us know that we need to get their confidence up. We need to make sure that they know not to fertilize in the summer. And if we look at those scores overall, so here we calculate the score based off of if they got a question right or wrong. And if they got a question right, we weight that point by how confident they were. So if someone was 70% confident in their correct answer, they'd get 0.7 out of 1 for that question. And so what we see here is that overall, yes, people within our networks do score much better than people within the public. I think our in-network folks could do better. A lot of them did get questions correct, but they just weren't as confident. They were, on average, only 73% confident in their answers. So we want to empower them and make sure that they know, this is the correct answer. We want them not to have that sort of trepidation with that. So this is a helpful area where we can set goals or targets for both the public and the people within our networks. And we can update our messages and communications accordingly to try to increase people's scores and their confidence in these answers going forward. Next up, looking at what they do. So we have things like active nature engagement. So activities where nature is really at the focus of them. And so these can be things like gardening, bird watching or wildlife viewing, camping, hiking, paddling, being on the bay, those sorts of things. And I won't go deep into all of these, but what we can see, another reason why we specifically distinguish between the public and those in our network is that we see that people within our network, unsurprisingly, do a lot of these nature engagement activities much more frequently than the public. But we can see that, gardening and wildlife viewing or bird watching are the most common for both people in our network and outside of our network. So we can think about, opportunities for us to offer more activities related to that to engage the public as well. And then there's other things like passive nature engagement. So where nature isn't the focus, but nature is important to it. So that's like exercising outdoors, reading or relaxing, sleeping outdoors, or having a picnic or a cookout. Again, we see more engagement with our in-network folks, but a lot of the public does engage in passive nature engagement. So that is another opportunity that we can capitalize on. And overall, we asked them how satisfied they are with those outdoor opportunities in their area. Within our network, we had very few people that said they were unsatisfied, but 1 out of 4 people in the general public said they were not particularly satisfied with outdoor opportunities available to them. So that gives us an insight into how we might be able to reduce that number in the future by offering more activities or a diversity of activities to people in the general public. We do also ask specific questions about stormwater related behaviors of interest to us. These include things like watering, how often they water their lawn or garden, how often they fertilize their lawn or garden, and how often they blow grass clippings into the street. Obviously, watering your lawn is a tricky one because it's really about how much water you're using. There's a bit of grace with people's responses there, and we see it's basically the same between the two audiences. The fertilizing one is more of an interest to us. We do have campaigns specifically related to that. And of these homeowners, we wanted to know how many of them know not to fertilize in the summer. So thinking back at that question we asked them, 88% of people within our network know not to fertilize in the summer, whereas just 62% know in the general public. But we wanted to know for the people that do fertilize, at least sometime during the year, how many of them are actually fertilizing in the summer? And what we found was that about 1/3 of the public that is fertilizing is doing it in the summer, and about 1/4 of the people that are fertilizing in our network are doing it in the summer. And if we look at it, the results that they answered, what we see is that of these people that do fertilize in the summer, for the public, over half of them know that they're not supposed to fertilize in the summer, but they do it anyway. But in our network, 92%, almost every single person in our networks that is fertilizing is doing it during the summer when they know they're not supposed to. So that's maybe a bit concerning. And so we need to think about what's going on here. What are the other factors that come into play that is contributing to these folks fertilizing when they know they're not supposed to? We do also have other pro-environmental behaviors of interest here. I won't go into them for the sake of time, but we have general pro-environmental behaviors like choosing to walk, bike, or carpool instead of driving, recycling. We have some green infrastructure things like rain barrels, rain gardens, or swales, and then also contributing to restoration or native plantings and things like that. Going into then what they want, so we asked them about their priorities for different topics. And generally what we see is on average for the different environmental priorities that we have, unsurprisingly, people within our networks tend to score the environmental priorities as higher priority than people in the general public. About 51% of people within our network chose environmental priorities as their top priority versus just about 1/4 of the general public. And whenever we use that with our spatial data of street intersections, we can actually create these hot and cold spot maps. So if we want to know what neighborhoods exist out there that specifically have high environmental priorities for the area, we can actually create these maps to identify areas here down in sort of southern middle St. Pete. We have some other areas along the coast. Specifically here, we've got like the Progress Village, Riverview areas where environmental priorities are a bit higher, but we also have colder spots like up here towards Pinellas Park where maybe they're lower priorities for folks. And so that can be really useful for us when planning our efforts and thinking about what the communities want. And just for comparison here, you can see how these two groups stack up for other types of priorities. The biggest difference being the economy, the public having much more emphasis on economic priorities than our people within our network. but similar ratings when it comes to infrastructure and social service priorities. Here's a list of what all those priorities are. I won't go into all of them, but just so you can sort of see some of the key differences between them. So like access to more nature spaces is a big difference between the public and in-network folks versus something like more jobs is a bigger priority for the public than it is for people in our network. And we can use these to really map out specifically where are there overlaps between what people in the public want versus what people in our network want. And so here's an example where the top 5 priorities of each of them, we have something like improvements to flood protection infrastructure and improvements to water quality in local rivers and ponds are high priorities for both audiences. And so that can give us insight into maybe what our priorities should be for delivering to the communities. And then last, getting into how they feel. So here we have how people scored on nature relatedness. So this is a measure of one's subjective connectedness to the natural environment. It's based off of 6 items in the survey. And basically, we want to capture this because it's how connected people are to nature. And a lot of studies have shown that people with higher connection to nature are happier, their well-being is higher, and they're also more likely to engage in pro-environmental behaviors. And we can also map these to identify which areas are more and least connected to nature. And so maybe we want to target these areas in brown where they are least connected to nature for more activities or to give them more opportunities to recreate and build their connection to nature across the watershed. Place identity is a measure of one's emotional or symbolic attachment formed with an area, specifically in our case, Tampa Bay. This is another one where a lot of the research says in order for someone to want to save a place or to care about the place, first they have to be attached to the place or they have to see that it's special to them. And so this gives us an idea of how attached people are to Tampa Bay, and then we can see if that has any influence on their environmental behaviors. Solastalgia is a measure of the distress caused by environmental change in an area, specifically here in Tampa Bay. And this is an interesting one because it's almost a mirror image between our public and our in-network folks. And so people within our networks basically have more distress from environmental changes that they're experiencing here in Tampa Bay compared to the public. And then the last one is a measure of hope. So there's a couple different dimensions of hope. Here we focus just on hope pathways, which is a measure of one's perceived capacity to achieve environmental goals in their community. And what we can see is that people in our network have a higher degree of hope when it comes to the environment, whereas the public is kind of split right down the middle. They've got really sort of almost a bell-like curve just down that middle. So the public is sort of split on how much they hope they have for solving environmental challenges in our region. And then the last thing that I think is really exciting that we also measured that I'm going to talk about today is eco-anxiety. And this is a relatively new term, kind of emerged in the last 5 or so, well, I guess maybe 2018, 2017, which maybe is almost 10 years ago now. But basically, eco-anxiety is a diagnostic measure of anxiety specifically related to the environmental crisis. And it's used on the same scale as diagnosing generalized anxiety disorder. And so in general, we can see that most people do not suffer from eco-anxiety. But interestingly, whenever we look at the diagnostic criteria to classify their affective symptoms of eco-anxiety, we find that the public is almost twice as likely, it's actually more than twice as likely to experience moderate to severe eco-anxiety than people within our networks. And that's surprising. It kind of contradicts what we might expect from other literature about things like ecological grief, which tends to be highest in people that work in conservation or that are dealing with environmental issues on a daily basis. And so this is going to be one of the things that we want to investigate further. Why is eco-anxiety present at such higher rates in the general public than it is in our networks? And one of the hypotheses that I've come up with in the last few days is thinking back to hope. Knowing that people in our networks have a higher degree of hope for environmental challenges, I wonder if that is maybe a factor that is moderating the effects that ultimately lead to eco-anxiety kind of manifesting. So again, this is just a highlight of some of the things that I've just been able to do in the last 5 days with the data that we have. There's still so much more in here in the survey that I didn't discuss that is all going to come into play, whether that's social capital, views on climate change, views on environmental justice, other measures of mental health, and even demographics. So how does all of this compare that we've seen for older populations versus younger populations, for people of different races and ethnicities and different political views, all that stuff. So it's just the start of the conversation. And soon we will have the Tampa Bay Community Survey full report released. I'm hoping to get that released realistically, probably at the beginning of 2025, so probably January or February. Once that's out, we will have all of the data, all of the code, all of the questions available to the public. And so you can all feel free to use it, take advantage of it. Any things that are of interest to you, please explore the data, come up with your own hypotheses, do your own maps, all sorts of things. And so that'll all be available to folks that are interested. And I will go ahead and just stop there. And yeah, happy to take a few minutes to answer any questions or comments that folks might have. Thank you. I'm going to check the comments. Any questions, comments? See something? Thanks so much, Yao Yang. All right, well, if there are no comments, I will go ahead and stop sharing. And then we will move on to our next speaker, which is going to be Rupu Gupta from the Hudson River Foundation. Rupu, I'm going to allow you to present here in just a second. Let's see. All right. I don't see the option to make a presenter, so I'm just going to make you a co-host for the time
Perfect.
being.
Thank you.
There
Great.
you go.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you. Can folks see my screen?
Yes.
Kyle, can you see it? Yes. Okay, great.
I can, but I'm not. Oh yeah, you're about to play it. Okay, great.
Yes.
Just gonna say it's still in the. There we go.
There we go. Yeah. I just wanted to make sure I didn't have to do anything else before I started moving forward. Well, thank you very much, Blake, for the invitation to share some of the work that the Hudson River Foundation has been up to in regards to social science. My name is Rupu Gupta. I'm Senior Scientist for Social Sciences and Evaluation at the Hudson River Foundation. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what we've been doing to engage a social science community here. And as you'll see, this has been kind of a work in progress, and this is one of our first forays into this very new space. But before kind of going into the details of that, I just wanted to contextualize a little bit about what the Hudson River Foundation does and what our priorities are. This is our mission, where we inspire, inform action through science and engagement with people to enhance the Hudson River, estuary, and watershed. So the foundation's focus is really thinking about every area that the Hudson touches, including the mid-Hudson Valley, the upper Hudson Valley, as well as the lower valley where the estuary connecting to the ocean is situated. For more than 40 years, the foundation has supported scientific research and engagement that informs decision-making. That's critical towards stewardship of this ecological space. So we work in close partnership with researchers, decision makers, policy advocates, resource managers, as well as communities who are all committed to create a healthy and resilient future for their communities, for the ecological spaces that they're part of. And for the last 10 years, the foundation has also managed the New York and New Jersey Harbor and Estuary Program, which is one of the 28 national estuary programs that was established under the Clean Water Act, like all of your programs. So the common thread in all our work is that we are committed to the use of science for decision making. So in 2023, the foundation created a new strategic plan, and this plan was created to guide our future work and develop really innovative approaches to achieve the foundation's vision. And there was a really strong emphasis on supporting use-inspired actionable science. We've been doing this all along, but we wanted to make this explicit, and we wanted to think through the various means in which we can demonstrate this commitment. And so in this plan, we really underscored people's integral role in this ecosystem. And because of that, we are interested in research that connects the social, the cultural, the economic, and also the biophysical systems that are part of the Hudson River watershed, so that all these insights can actually lead to better decision-making, management, or policy shifts to protect the Hudson River watershed. And this is the start of our social science research program, which has kept me occupied for pretty much the entire time I've been at the foundation. I've been there for just over a year now. And this social science research program squarely centers human engagement to think about how we can address all the social ecological challenges this particular watershed faces. And when we talk about human engagement, we are interested in the bidirectional ways in which people affect the river, as well as how the river affects people. So our goal with this program was really to connect with a new community of social scientists that the Hudson River Foundation is really keen to engage and keen to learn about. And we really hope to support researchers in producing actionable science that is innovative, science that has clear impact on addressing knowledge gaps, but it also has a societal benefit. It has an impact in whether in terms of policy decisions or in terms of management decisions or something else. And in that space, we also want to foster researchers' applied skills. This is not something most social scientists have been trained in. I'm a conservation psychologist, that's my training. But the applied aspect of really thinking about who's going to use the research we produce is not part of the training. And so we really want to think about how the foundation can support this new research community. So we went about a pretty intense process of developing a social science RFP. So as social scientists do, we started with what existing knowledge was around, essentially looking at the literature. We wanted to define what social science is, really looking at different ways in which different social sciences, whether anthropology, geography, sociology, psychology, are thinking about it. And we defined it really thinking about it as the systematic investigation of the multifaceted ways in which people's experiences are studied, including their thoughts, their behaviors, their emotions, and how it may connect with other societal systems, like economic, like social, like cultural, political systems, and what new knowledge emerges from that. So we scoured the research literature on what is known about riverine systems, not only in the US, but also internationally. We didn't want to focus just on the Hudson watershed. We knew that there was other research out there that could really help us shape this RFP. So that was the start of our process, and all of that is documented in an annotated bibliography where we identified the gaps that the foundation could help address as well through this RFP. Another kind of related literature review that we did was really thinking about how social science can impact how decisions are made, how research can impact how policymakers or resource managers or organizational leaders or community leaders are using the research. So we looked at what research was out there, and it's pretty limited. But what was evident was that co-development was part of this process, where researchers are co-developing research questions and thinking about what is impacting a specific community or a specific organization or a specific policy context. So all these insights we compiled into the RFP as well, and provided some guidelines for how research can think about the use and application of their research, which went into the RFP. In the process of developing the RFP, we also wanted to talk to social scientists who were embedded in this space. So while the literature review was being conducted, we also spoke with social scientists that were part of our the Hudson River Foundation staff's networks, or newer folks we were introduced to through this process. We spoke with a number of different social scientists across many disciplines, and they were invited to be part of this process through two ways. If they wanted to, they could help us by sharing their perspectives on where they saw the research gaps in the literature on how people engaged with river systems. But if they so chose, they could also review the focus areas we were developing down the line. It was very gratifying to see that the perspectives they were sharing was also something was aligned with what we were finding in the literature review. So that was very reassuring and promising as we set out on this pathway. So with insights from social scientists as well as our literature review, we came up with 3 areas of focus for our RFP to really prioritize. The first one was at the systems level. What we saw in the research literature was there was a body of literature focusing on systems levels analysis. A lot of it focused on economic modeling, a lot of it doing spatial analyses that were using large-scale databases and really connecting the dots between environmental protection, between policy decision-making, as well as the different ways in which people are engaging with the watershed. What was missing was a better articulation of what social indicators might be in these systems beyond just economic ones. So that was our ask in this particular research area, to more explicitly connect the dots and embed the people who are part of the system and data from them to really explore relationships between the various societal systems. For each research area of focus, we also provided some examples of research studies that could fit into this each area. So in this case, our example was to think about a predictive analysis of socioeconomic impacts of ecological resilience actions. So what might be the impacts for society, gentrification, and what that means for strategies to ensure that there's a just process in a specific area. So all these examples also really focus on that impact piece of how this research might be be applied by certain actors. The second area of focus was on decision makers. In the literature, we saw there were a bunch of studies about public perceptions of management and kind of policymakers' perspectives on environmental protection, but there was a gap in not only how the public understood what decision makers wanted, but they weren't even aware of, what the match might be. So we wanted to really think through, like, what is a better way to align the two. So this research area of focus really emphasizes the sort of capacities and skills that decision makers might need to better work with the public to support protection of the Hudson. And this is really about kind of bridging and connecting different stakeholders as part of this process of environmental engagement in the Hudson. So an example of this might be a mixed method study of policymakers' knowledge of plastic pollution and how people are impacted, so better policies can be developed to reduce plastic use. The third research area of focus is on the public, and it's about understanding the public's motivations and barriers to protect the current and future conditions of the Hudson. And there are two strands to it. The first one is very much focused on climate change and how the public might be able to be better equipped and be better empowered to address climate change impacts. And so an example of this was really about thinking through how inclusive climate justice approaches might be developed, which could draw on very different intersectional perspectives. There's a lot of research on kind of cultural perspectives on climate justice, but there are different subcultures which may be worth really drawing from. So we thought it might be interesting to look at kind of the intersectional pieces and how that might inform coalition building. Mind you, these are just examples that we posed, so people had a sense of how the research area of focus might be kind of implemented. And then the second piece of that third research area is a little bit more broad. It's still about public motivations and barriers, but this one is kind of thinking through very broadly what people's relationships and connections with local ecologies are and what that might mean for stewardship. So an example here was an ethnographic study of environmental stewardship ethics among specific faith-based communities. So these were our three research areas of focus that we really wanted social sciences to think about. And so I wanted to share a little bit about where we are in the RFP process. We launched the social science RFP in July of this year. We were really gratified to see the strong interest and reception. It was a multi-phase process. The first phase was in submitting a letter of interest, a 2-page letter of interest, and we got a number of letters of interest. And one of the things that the main thing that these letters had to demonstrate was the knowledge potential of their research, how it's contributing to new knowledge and addressing research gaps that we'd identified, but also how they were going to work with partners who would be interested in using and applying the research for decision making. So our internal review process, where we kind of identified specific criteria, really focused on kind of the balance of those two, its potential for scholarship as well as its potential for societal impact. And it was a very intense process, a very insightful process. And we have invited a subset of teams to submit full proposals at this point. What we learned during this process, because we also wanted researchers as they were, even before they started writing the letter of interest, to contact us to set up an informational call. We felt this was really important because we wanted to hear from the researchers about their research ideas and kind of provide guidance. And in that process, also emphasize our priorities. Everything I've shared with you, so far the research knowledge potential as well as the impact. Those are the things we are looking for. And we wanted to be transparent about what our review process was going to be like as well. So this was really an opportunity to kind of have a really open discussion about what is possible or what is not possible in the idea folks are thinking about, and encourage them to submit that letter of interest. And in some cases, people chose not to because of kind of the phase of the research project they had in mind. But that's why we wanted to have this very collaborative process embedded. So the next phases of this are as follows. Full proposals are due next month, kind of imminent at this point. And we are hoping to fund a few projects, a handful of projects for 100K for an 18 to 24 month study. That's what we are looking for. An external review process will be guiding this phase of the review process right now. And our plan is to continue to support applicants as they move through this phase, especially around thinking through that partnership development piece. And we hope to announce awards early next year. So future directions for the foundation, this was a really wonderful learning experience for the foundation. We are finding that this new research program is exemplifying one of the ways in which innovation is happening at the foundation. We have reached and engaged with the social science community who is very interested, who's very eager to work with us. In those informational calls I mentioned, researchers were really happy that we are thinking through what impact might mean from their research and thinking about how they can be part of a community thinking through that as well. So we see that as an opportunity for HRF to continue to support and lead efforts on that research impact connection in collaboration with the folks we may be funding. So we see an opportunity also to continue to support ways for this engaged community post-funding to be part of a network, to really thinking through what and sharing what they are learning and how they can continue to support social science and its application in the Hudson River estuary. We're very excited about not only the rest of this process, but what it means for future iterations of this research program. And hope to provide you more updates as they unfold. But I will leave you with that here. Thank you very much. And I'm happy to take any questions or comments. And I'm also going to stop sharing, if that's okay.
Great. Thanks so much, Rupu. Any questions?
I had a question, Rupu. I was wondering if you had any, I don't know, best guesses, I guess, or thoughts on if your initial step being for folks to submit an LOI rather than, maybe what would be required in other RFPs, and kind of really encouraging engagement with the RFP.
So what was your question? Like, can you, yeah.
Just if you thought that, so for a lot of RFPs, I mean, it's like, it's a lot of content that's included in folks' proposals.
Yeah.
And so if you thought maybe having it phased so that the first step was just to submit a letter of interest, if you think that was really beneficial in getting interest in the RFP and maybe kind of making sure you and applicants were kind of on the same page for what y'all were looking for.
Absolutely. I mean, we were very purposeful and strategic in wanting an LOI phase because, as I mentioned, the foundation hasn't connected with a social science group till July. explicitly. I think our work through the Hudson, the HEP program, the New York, New Jersey Hudson Estuary program, has worked with social scientists, but this is kind of a very concerted effort to kind of broaden the reach and think through, what research might mean, not just for the estuary, but the watershed as a whole. We wanted to do an LOI primarily for two reasons. I mean, we wanted to get to know who this community is and have an opportunity to kind of directly interface with them, learn about their research interests, and also find alignment and guide them to see if their interests and ours matched. And those were the folks we invited to submit a full proposal. So we knew that this would take more time, more effort. We invested a lot of time in this process because we wanted to, because we really had limited understanding of who was out there. I will say, the folks who reached out to us were not just folks who were around locally. There were folks from other parts of the country, but there were a couple that were international too. So that was very interesting to see, like, where our outreach efforts had kind of reached, but we didn't know who they were, and most of them had never engaged with the foundation before. So we wanted to kind of get to know them a little bit more, but also make sure that what we were hoping for in the RFP aligned with how they were thinking about it, and specifically around the new knowledge creation and its connection to impact. Most people were also committed to that piece. And it was very insightful to talk through what that might mean for their research project and how we might be able to support them in the future post-funding. So it was really, really helpful. We had to do it. That was a very long-winded answer, Kyle, but thank you for asking that.
Natalie,
Yeah.
how's your hand?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Nathalie Hamel. I'm the lead for our reporting on socio-ecological indicators here at the Puget Sound Partnership, called the Vital Signs. Thank you so much, Rupu, for your talk. Maybe just a quick follow-up to Kyle's question. How did you distribute the RFP such that you received such like so many responses? It's really impressive that you got 30. And international. So what are the channels that you use to distribute your RFP?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. I mean, this was a topic of much internal discussion. The foundation's network is pretty huge. I know locally, regionally for sure, but each of us, each staff member also has a larger network. We also engaged our board members in helping us kind of share the RFP. So I think we were really invested in kind of broadening the reach as much as we could. So we really thought through not only our specific networks, but also other professional networks we were part of. For instance, one of my colleagues reminded me to kind of share it with, other affiliated groups. And I remembered I was part of the social science working group that's affiliated with the Society for Conservation Biology, where I know a couple of folks, saw it from. So it was just making those small decisions that helped us. But it was a thoughtful process, not only with staff, but also with our board members, and kind of really being aggressive about sharing it in as many networks we could be part of. There was another question, Natalie, I think, or did I answer your question?
You didn't know. It was a single question. It probably was just because I was rambling about it. You might think there was two, but yeah, just that. That's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
We also have a question in the chat from Sasha. Sasha asks, can you share how much money you're allocating for these research projects in the RFPs?
Yeah, we're thinking 100K for, a few projects is where we are at. And it'll actually depend upon how long the research study is, because we're hoping these studies will be anywhere between 18 to 24 months. And we'll see what comes in. But our initial, like, 100K is kind of what we're asking people to indicate in the budget.
Great, thank you. Any other final questions, thoughts? I will just add, Rupu, I think it was your research focus area 1. I was very excited to see your example because I have also been wanting to do gentrification research in the watershed. So if you guys are also going to be doing that, let's work together and we can do some cool comparative case studies. And I think that's a really important issue. I know a lot of folks in the social science subcommittee are focused on environmental equity, justice, gentrification, things like that. So I think they also have a very big interest and willingness to support that kind of work.
Absolutely. And likewise, what you shared in your presentation, Blake, I think there's a lot of shared interests that I would like to continue to explore with you. My work at the foundation has just begun. If you remember my title, I'm a social scientist. I do research, but I also do evaluation. So, I'm also trying to set up that process in the foundation to really think about our impact and how we engage with all the different partners and groups that we do, including all the partners through the Hudson, the HEP program. So yes, let's connect for sure. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Rupu. Next, our next speaker, we'll have Kyle Clifton. Kyle Clifton is at Oregon State University and has been working with the Puget Sound Partnership on their social science initiatives, many of which have been an inspiration for the work that we have started here in the Tampa Bay Estuary program. So Kyle, feel free to take it away.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here just because I got some slides put together. So maybe let me know if you're seeing the pretty version and not the presenter version.
Yes,
Are we
looks
good?
good.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much. I've really enjoyed the talk so far, so I'm really excited to be here with you guys. So yeah, as Blake said, I am with Oregon State University, but the bulk of the work that I get to do is with Puget Sound Partnership. And Natalie Hamel is here today. She is partnership staff and she works with the vital signs of the partnership, which I'll introduce in a few slides. So you guys will understand that jargon, which will be great. So this is a figure. You don't need to read all of it. Don't worry. I'm going to walk you through just some of the high points from this. But this is a figure from a manuscript that's in revision right now, showing the timeline for social science and human well-being integration in Puget Sound restoration through Puget Sound Partnership. And so, as you can see, the partnership has been chewing on this for a little longer than some other NEPs or similar type organizations. So this really started when the partnership started in 2007, 2008. And there are a number of different thrusts here, kind of color coded. And again, I'll walk you through some of the high points of these that really just kind of demonstrate how this integration has occurred through policy, through process, or through products or any other P words over the last about 15 years or so. So I'll give you guys a little bit of context on the system within which we're working. And then walk you through some of those high points from the previous figure. And then we'll wrap up with some resources. And Blake got a PDF of these slides in with the meeting materials. And so that PDF is chock full of links. So you can access websites or to any of the bodies that I mentioned, or also to any of the product-y type resources. So we're here in the Puget Sound, which is great. It's awfully large. The Puget Sound is about 100 miles from, as the crow flies from north to south. And I looked up some Florida facts to make some comparisons for you guys. And so that's about similar as from Tampa to Fort Myers. Its average depth is 450 feet, but its maximum depth is as much as 930 feet, which is 100 feet taller than what the internet tells me is the tallest building in Florida, which is the Panorama Tower in Miami. So the body of water itself is really large, but the area of work that the partnership is involved in is throughout all of the watersheds that feed into the Puget Sound itself. And so that includes 12 counties, 14 federally designated tribes. It's the most densely populated region in the state of Washington. There's about 5.3 million people living here, which is nearly 70% of the population of the whole state. And so that's a whole lot of people, a whole lot of diversity of folks and diversity of systems. And all of these people get to live here, we get to work here, recreate, and derive really cultural and psychological well-being from this area. So that's where we are. And so I'll take us now to kind of the first foundational qualities of the integration of social science and human well-being in the work that the partnership does. So the partnership is a state agency. It was established in 2007, and I think it's relatively quite large compared to some of the other NEPs. There's about 75 staff members right now with the partnership. Not including myself. And so the mission of this agency is to accelerate ecosystem recovery, and that includes both biophysical and social components. And so there are 6 mandated goals for ecosystem recovery for the partnership to work toward, and 2 of those goals are human well-being related. So that is a healthy human population and a vibrant quality of life. And so this is really kind of the foundation of how this integration of human consideration has been supported through the partnership. And so the outcome here of these statutorily mandated goals is that it really institutionalizes this social ecological narrative. So it considers ecosystem recovery, and social components, human components, are part of that ecosystem. So it's fully baked in through legislative mandate here in the foundation of the partnership itself. Building on that is that the partnership adopted this integrated ecosystem recovery conceptual model. And so those of you who are familiar with things like this, you'll look at some of the factors and some of the relationships in here, and you'll think, this is really pretty similar to other social ecological system frameworks, and that's exactly right. And so the outcome here is really just further institutionalizing that social ecological narrative. And this really establishes a framework to guide recovery efforts. So, we can always return to this as a touchstone of how I think Rupu said it was bi-directional. So it's both impacts of people on the environment and how they are impacted by the environment ourselves. So I'm going to move us along to our next element here, to monitoring. And so this is the vital signs that Natalie kind of teased for me earlier. So this is the vital sign cube. This is a product that some of you might be familiar with from the partnership. On the outer border of this cube are those goals that I had bulleted in the previous slide. And so remember, two of those goals, healthy human population and vibrant human quality of life, are supporting human well-being in ecosystem recovery in the Sound. So there are those two goals on the outer edge. When you go one layer into the squares, those are what the partnership calls vital signs. And so those are further breaking down, how are we going to achieve those goals? What can we combine to roll up to achieve that overarching ecosystem recovery goals? So there are 10 human well-being vital signs. So those are the green and the orange in the figure here. And each of those vital signs can be further broken down into what the partnership calls indicators, which is jargon, but it's pretty intuitive jargon in the monitoring world. And so each vital sign has 1 to 3 indicators associated with it, and tracking and monitoring where we're at on any of those indicators rolls up into how we're doing on that vital sign, which rolls up into how we're addressing that overarching goal. You'll also see in the vital signs listed here that the partnership's conception of human well-being is pretty broad. It includes human health components, it includes economic, cultural, psychological considerations. So it's a really broad conception of what we mean when we talk about human well-being and ecosystem recovery. And so I'll talk for a minute about how these were developed, because some of that, I don't know, how the sausage gets made can be helpful for folks. And so this was back starting in around 2008. There were a couple key folks, social scientists at the time associated with the Puget Sound Institute, which is a kind of a research arm of the University of Washington. And they conducted 3 workshops at the watershed level to develop some of what these indicators or vital signs could be. They brought these to social science experts in the region and outside of the region to kind of further hone in and prioritize what would be appropriate and meaningful measures of ecosystem progress, so indicators and vital signs in this context, and then brought that short list to partnership decision-making bodies to further rank and select. And then finally, the vital signs and their indicators were adopted from the Leadership Council within the partnership. And so that process started back in 2008, but it is ongoing. Natalie is on the cusp of supporting a project that is revisiting a number of the human well-being vital signs and indicators to revise them and make sure that they're measuring what we're wanting to measure and salient for the populations within the Puget Sound region. So while there was a starting point, it is ongoing. So outcomes from this are really to institutionalize social science methods and approaches and frameworks and theories and products in the monitoring. So it's really institutionalizing this monitoring of using social science methodologies or others, depending on the indicator, to track progress toward the human well-being outcomes. And a number of these 10 indicators, 6 to be specific, are monitored through the Human Wellbeing Vital Signs Survey, which I'll do a quick deep dive that's kind of oxymoronic, but I'll mention that briefly for the next few slides, just because we got to hear a lot about Blake's, and sometimes it's fun to kind of compare and contrast. So this survey is administered by the Human Dimensions Lab at Oregon State University, of which I'm a part of. A current PhD student is the current project manager for this. And so this survey was first distributed in 2018, and it's been distributed every 2 years. We've got 18, 20, 22, and we're about to launch 2024. So this will be the 4th iteration of the survey. It goes out to that whole 12 county area of including all of the Puget Sound watersheds. 4 of those counties are classified as urban, 8 are classified as rural. And this was a general population survey. So 750 addresses were purchased within each of those 12 counties for a total of 9,000. And with the help of a $2 bill incentive included in the mailed survey following a Dillman method, we were able to get about a 21% response rate, which is fantastic. Since we have the addresses, we can also geospatially analyze our responses. So this is a similar kind of dot figure to what Blake shared, which I added in this presentation after I saw his figure in a presentation he gave last week. So we are able to do a similar level of analysis. Although most of the reporting is done at the county level because there aren't many significant differences from county to county. And we have this fantastic survey report. So this is the survey report from the 2022 version of the survey. And so this is just an example of one of the pages in it for the good governance vital sign. So this shows the response in the survey to each of the items that we use as to create the index for good governance. In the top right-hand corner, it's color intensity by county based on response. It has the average response for the 2022 version, that 4.05 figure. And then the bottom right-hand corner shows the comparison for the current and the previous two iterations of the survey. So just to kind of recenter us here, that was the survey deep dive. We're zooming back out. So we've just been talking about monitoring and how that occurs at the partnership. And so the outcomes of this monitoring effort are really institutionalizing social science monitoring to track progress toward improving those human well-being outcomes. So we'll keep clipping along now to the next element after monitoring, which is science. So I'm just going to talk you through each of the bullets here on this slide. So we've got the science panel. This is one of the boards at the partnership. It's a group of 17 top scientists in the Puget Sound region, in the Pacific Northwest and beyond. They provide guidance to the partnership to develop a comprehensive science-based plan for Puget Sound recovery. And these folks are experts across the breadth of scientific disciplines, not just social science. But as of right now, well, there has been an increase in the number of social scientists represented on the science panel. So of the 17 total members right now, 6 of them are social scientists. And again, that's really broad conception of what the partnership considers in their human well-being. And so that includes economists, that includes public health folks, it includes psychologists. And the current chair of the science panel is a social scientist also. The Social Science Advisory Committee is kind of the sister or the cousin group to this COP. This used to be a subcommittee that advised the science panel, but it has cut that umbilical cord and it is now kind of floating out on its own within the partnership universe. This is an independent advisory group, so it's not partnership staff. And they contribute to, they can still provide advice, although now more broadly, not just to the science panel, but to other bodies or efforts within the partnership. They also help to address social science priorities in the region through conducting science themselves, and also to Puget Sound partnership planning and monitoring efforts and products created. There's also a number of social science or scientist contracts. These are both state and federally funded, which is important when conducting human subjects research with ethics and OMB approval. It's nice to also have a pot of state funding. And so that funds folks like myself. It funds economists. It can fund folks to do ad hoc projects or to fill research needs of identified research priorities or gaps. And then there is that funding, which I kind of combined with the contracts in my explanation of the contracts there. But yeah, where there's people, there's funding behind it. And so again, that's both federal and state pots of money. So the outcome here of integration work throughout kind of this science execution is really to institutionalize that social science expertise within the partnership and in the networks that it engages with. And it can apply social science funding and conduct social science research to really make progress toward achieving those human well-being recovery goals. So from science, we'll move on to our final element here of kind of the how integration has worked within the partnership so far, and that is planning. So again, just a bulleted list. I'll talk you through what some of these products are. These are a little more on the product side as opposed to the body or activity side on the previous slide. So the action agenda is the official plan that the partnership creates and uses to advance protection and restoration efforts across the region. It's a 4-year plan. And so the current one is 2022 to 2026. Again, these are linked in the PDF version. And we're already working on cooking up the next version of the action agenda. The current version, though, was the first one to include specific strategies for human well-being as opposed to exclusively biophysical efforts. The next one will be even more integrated, although I've been using that word so much in my role, and probably you've been seeing it so much in this presentation, it might not mean anything anymore, but a lot more work on acknowledgement of human dimensions and human well-being considerations, especially with conversations about trade-offs and human well-being outcomes in a lot of the biophysical content that shows up in this action agenda, in this recovery plan. The second resource here is the Implementation Strategies Human Dimensions Protocol. Again, this is a state agency, so there is some jargon here. So implementation strategies are the strategic plans that the partnership and other agency partners develop and use to help meet vital sign targets. Right now, there are 9. There's 8.5 because one's being developed currently, but we're on the cusp of having 9 implementation strategies. So these plans best compile the best available science to identify key uncertainties, assess effectiveness of recovery efforts, and to identify priority actions and funding awards. So they'll put out RFP, they'll identify priorities, they'll put out RFPs, they'll award work. And so the human dimensions protocol for the implementation strategies, so the protocol document walks folks through what do we mean when we talk about human dimensions? How is it the same or different from social sciences? How is it the same or different from human well-being? And it really is a guide, it's a protocol for how folks can integrate human dimensions considerations into these implementation strategies. The next item on here is the science work plan. This is developed by the science panel, which was on a previous slide. The science work plan is the actual product itself. It's created by the science panel. It identifies priority recovery and research efforts for ecosystem recovery. And then finally, we have the social science research agenda. It is also on the cusp of being revised. The previous iteration of this was for the entire Salish Sea region, so a little broader than Puget Sound. And it categorizes and prioritizes social science research needs in the region. And so just in the last year, we've worked on a revision and an update of this product. And so that update is forthcoming, but linked in the PDF is the previous iteration of this social science research agenda. So to round us off, again, in the PDF version, this is just a list of a lot of those products that I've mentioned throughout all of the slides, starting with that conceptual model through the vital signs, the survey report, which includes the survey itself and the data, and all of these are linked in the PDF of this presentation. So we also have that data available, so please dive in, have fun, play with it. The action agenda, that protocol document, the work plan, and the social science research agenda. And then some key folks you might want to know in the partnership and its, I don't know, support team, I suppose. There's myself there at the top. Kelly Biedenweg and Krista Harrington were members of the Human Dimensions Lab at Oregon State University and have done a lot of work with the vital signs, with human dimensions and social science integration in the partnership more generally. And Krista is the project manager for the survey. So if you have some survey specific questions that I fall short on today, Krista will be your point of contact. We also have Natalie, who's the vital sign lead, and she's here today. Becky Hollander, there is a single social scientist on staff at the partnership, and that is Becky. And then we have Scott Redman, who's the Science and Eval Program Director at the partnership. So I think we might have a few minutes yet for questions. Thank you so much. I appreciate all of you.
Thanks, Kyle. Any questions? Opening up the floor to folks. Sasha, yes.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks so much for your great presentation. I'm Sasha Harris-Levitt from San Francisco Estuary Partnership. Can you tell us a little more about the relationship between the Human Dimensions Lab at OSU and the Puget Sound Partnership? Like, how did that collaboration emerge, and how do you two work together?
So that emerged with Kelly Biedenweg, who was the lead as a social scientist in the initial effort to create the human well-being vital signs and indicators. And at the time, she was with Puget Sound Institute, which is kind of a research arm of the University of Washington. And so she was contracted to lead that effort. And so that was kind of the initial, the acorn, I suppose. And then it just really grew from there. Kelly then was with OSU, which is where she still is, and she's one of the profs in the Human Dimensions Lab, which is now massive. There's like, I think 16 of us this year in the lab, and 3 profs. And so she has continued that relationship with the partnership, and her PhD student, Krista, is who administers the survey. And then about 85% of my workload is for the partnership, and that's through a collaborative agreement funded through the EPA. And she is now the science panel chair for the partnership.
We have a question in the chat from Annie. You mentioned how social science research projects are funded, but I'm wondering if you can speak to how the social science integration efforts overall are funded at the Puget Sound Partnership.
I think that would be through integration efforts generally. That would be through that through the Human Dimensions Lab, which is primarily EPA funded. There is also state funds specific to social science work at the partnership, and that supports Becky Hollander's role as the social sciences coordinator, and she's partnership staff. And so there are state funds, some are just biennial, and so it's always kind of having to do the dance of proving of how well you spent, how productive you were with that money, to hopefully incent the legislators to include that in their next budget. And then some of it is kind of more ad hoc. So there might be a push for, maybe social science, so for more integration in the forthcoming action agenda. And so that's just a contract that's awarded to a group of researchers who do that type of work. And so in particular for environmental justice considerations within the action agenda. So there are, and I see Natalie just came off mute, so please jump in.
Yeah, just to support your answer there, Kyle. the state funds do support the survey, the human well-being survey, and the work associated with that Krista does. And I also want to mention that we work with a group of economists too. And I know a little bit less, maybe Kyle, you know more about it, but we try to weave in some I don't know, some sciences related to economics as well in our human well-being related work, human dimensions related work.
Yeah, definitely, especially since, and I feel like one of the results from Blake's survey kind of alluded to this, of just how salient economics is for the general public, and their relationship with the sound. Economics and human health also are oftentimes kind of that most immediate connector. Yeah, Rupu?
Yeah, thanks so much, Kyle and Natalie, for sharing more about your work. I was really struck by kind of your emphasis on institutionalizing social science work all throughout, and what a testament that is to kind of building this new norm for infusing social science into the work we all do. And which means like it's not yet recognized, right? And we have to kind of put in a lot of effort to create those pathways, those approaches. So my question really is, as you think about kind of the future of this work and the longevity of this work, what additional supports, governance structures, etc., would you need to help institutionalize it, help institute that norm? Does that make sense? I'm just thinking about the sustainability of this. And this is something I'm going to be thinking about as well.
Yeah. So I don't want to diminish how consistently and how frequently there are still very many conversations with folks within the partnership and with the other agencies or partners in the broader recovery network. So conversations that I or folks like me still have, where we are still needing to justify, hey, humans are part of a social ecological system, and here's why you should care about them and human well-being outcomes. So that soft work is still very frequent. So I don't want to diminish that, but I do think it is really helpful. It provides kind of a good, I don't know, backbone, I suppose, to have that legislative mandate to say, hey, there are 6 statutorily required recovery goals, and 2 of them are human well-being. So if I can't convince you with all of these conversations, maybe it's a good argument for certain personalities or certain roles that people have, to just say, if you're not, motivated by this conversation that we're having, hey, let's return to what this is founded in, and it's this isn't just my personal interest. This is the foundation of it all. And so I think having that is really helpful. And sometimes it's useful to kind of pivot to that touchstone.
Thank you.
Yeah, I might just
Great.
add quickly, I think like you want to move on, just like those EPA geographic funds for the National Estuary Program, like that the foresight that EPA had years ago to support social sciences has been instrumental. And then the state kind of came out on board with some more funding. So like having basically half and half funding from state and federal, but like, so we want to see those NEP funds continue because they're bought in, and it's just a matter now of like figuring out how best to to reuse Kyle's word, like really integrate the data, right, and really influence, I would say, the planning and the action with all of this good thought work.
Yeah. And the state also passed within the last few years the HEAL Act, Healthy Environment for All. And so that has as the name implies, environmental justice outcomes are its intention. And so that has also been a really important on-ramp to encouraging folks to consider human dimensions or human well-being outcomes, maybe through this EJ on-ramp. I'm just going to say that again because I can't think of something else.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Kyle and Natalie, for answering those questions. For the sake of time, I am going to move on. I do see that Shoko has a question in the chat that probably Kyle or Natalie, if you want to answer directly in the chat. I'm also, Stacy, I like your question. I may save that to the end once everyone has spoken, and then we can all collectively add in at the end to answer your question. So last up, going to California. We are going to have Rachel Klopfenstein as well as Annie Merritt from Delta Stewardship Council, and we'll also have Sasha Harris-Lovett from the San Francisco Estuary Partnership to talk about this connected system that they have in California. And I think, Rachel, you'll be starting us off, so feel free to take it away.
Perfect, thank you. I'm just gonna test out sharing my screen. Are you all seeing the correct slide?
We see the sort
Or
of
do you s-
view in the presentation, kind of, not the
Oh, interesting.
individuals.
Okay. That's good. Any better? Nope. Doesn't look better.
No, it's still the same.
Why is it doing that? Any tips and tricks, folks? Is that better?
I don't see anything sharing at the moment.
Okay, one sec. We got new office computer screens, so nothing is consistent to my home office. I'm just sharing my screen. It's still the wrong one.
The wrong. I can share from my end if you'd like that.
It's okay. Let me just stop. I think I'm not sure if you have the latest version. And this is great.
Rachel, I think, yeah, if you can't figure it out soon, I think it's fine if Blake shares. It's very
Okay, that's fine. Okay, that works, Annie, if you prefer that. Blake, you can just share the slides, I guess. Sorry about that, everybody. I
Yeah, no
have 3
worries.
screens, but it won't work.
No worries. I'll pull that up right here. All right, so the resolution may be off a little bit, but hopefully this will work. All right, hopefully you can see that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little fuzzy for me, but I think it's not a huge issue. I can try to resolve it while we present, and I'll just blow through this because I feel like I've wasted half of our time. So anyway, I'm Rachel Klopfenstein. I'm a program manager here at the Delta Stewardship Council, a small California state agency, and Annie Merritt's going to take most of the presentation, and then we'll be followed by Sasha. Next slide. Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, this is the PDF. All right, well, the map here on the screen just includes the entire San Francisco estuary, which spans the San Francisco Bay and the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. And it's the point of connection between waters draining from the Sierra Nevada and out through the Pacific Ocean. It's the hub of freshwater supply for the state, habitat for many important species, and a unique area with an important history and lively agricultural industry. And the San Francisco Estuary Partnership is part of the National Estuary Program. So they lead a regional strategy called the Estuary Blueprint to protect and restore the water quality and ecological integrity of the estuary from the Golden Gate to the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. And I don't know, you might have an animation, I'm not sure, or a next slide. Okay, there's just a figure. Okay, yeah, I'll say scroll down. Perfect, thank you. Okay, so just upstream, the Delta Stewardship Council works to further the co-equal goals for the Delta, to protect and restore the Delta's ecosystems and ensure a more reliable water supply for the state, while enhancing the Delta as an evolving place. And together, our agencies both play a leadership role in protecting this important system. One way we've progressed is in beginning to integrate social sciences into the region's management. Although we are definitely not as far along as the Puget Sound, but we've taken a lot of inspiration from them. So next slide. So I'll just give a brief little background here that multiple events and efforts, primarily since 2016, have helped to show that the Bay Delta really lacked social science information and was lagging behind other systems in incorporating this information, despite its importance and obvious social ecological connections. So in 2018, the council commissioned a task force of social scientists to provide a suite of recommendations for how to better integrate social sciences into the Delta. And since 2020, when the report was released, we've worked to make progress on the following goals. Goal 1, just awareness and capacity building. Understanding that education, back again to Kyle's comments, education about social science is a key step, both internally and externally. We have to hire the right people and grow our program and our understanding. Goal 2, build relationships and knowledge bases. So by working with other entities who see this value and by coordinating and funding more social science research and embedding it into projects. Goal 3 is this integrate and implement learning. So this is really mostly the next step for us to come. So idea there being after funding and doing more social science work, with that information, we can actually integrate that into our decisions. And I'll just briefly say it's been somewhat of an uphill battle in some regards, but we've been lucky enough to make some important partners in the process and collective progress. So for example, SFAP, San Francisco Estuary Partnership, has been a great partner who's made strides in the San Francisco Bay. And we were also able to hire a social science extension specialist through California Sea Grant, I think first in 2019 or 2020. 2021. And we started a network of social science champions and practitioners interested in social sciences in the Bay Delta. So I'm happy to share more about any of these initiatives, but for now, in terms of projects, one major success that's come in recent years is the completion of the first Delta resident survey, which Annie is going to speak about next.
Yeah, that's likely. So yeah, hi everyone, thanks for I'll just dive right into this. So yeah, the Delta resident survey was really a first of its kind survey for this region of residents' perspectives on regional, social, and environmental change and well-being. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I want to point out that this effort was conducted by a collaborative research team shown on the slide here, and it was funded by the Council's Delta Science Program. So I was not part of the research team, but I'm just presenting on the effort today. So also want to point out that all materials, like the data, analysis code, summary report, and more are available at the links on the slide, as well as an interactive data explorer. So we'll try to remember to put that in the chat at the end. And also just want to note, most of the graphics shown in today's presentation are from the summary report for this project. Next slide. So yeah, to begin to address that lack of social science data for the Delta that I think Rachel just mentioned, the Delta resident survey really had 3 overall objectives. So one was to start assessing some key components of Delta residents' subjective well-being. The second was to pilot test a survey-based data collection approach to really see if that approach was feasible for this region moving forward. And finally, to develop the capacity and partnerships that are needed to be able to do social well-being monitoring over time. And so a lot of background research and community input went into designing the survey. So just a couple examples, there was a survey advisory group, which included academic researchers, community representatives, agency staff from federal and state agencies to really advise on the survey design. And then, yeah, I also want to note, so the team looked at other surveys that have been done in other estuaries. So for example, what we just heard about, Puget Sound Partnership's Vital Signs Survey. So, okay, so this survey was divided into 4 sections or elements that contribute to human well-being. So these include quality of life, risk and resilience to climate change and other environmental hazards, sense of place, and civic engagement and governance. And there were survey questions to measure each of those subtopics within those 4 elements. Next slide, please. Okay, so how did the team do the survey? So they decided to use a stratified random sampling approach for the survey, where they broke up the region into 3 survey zones. And that's shown on the map here. So the first zone, which is that reddish pink color, is the more rural interior of the region, where there's a much lower population than the urban areas. So in that zone, all addresses received an invitation to do the survey. And then the other 2 zones, so the blue is the urban areas of the Delta. And then the third zone included disadvantaged communities that are just outside the legal Delta boundary. But it was decided to include those communities based on input from community partners, and really because, you know, these areas are often left out of Delta governance because they're just outside that legal boundary. So in those other 2 survey zones, a random sample of addresses received a survey invitation in the mail, and that was about 25% of those addresses. Yeah, and people had the option to do the survey online or as a hard copy, and it was available in English and Spanish. So, okay, who did the survey? So we saw an overall response rate of 2.9%, and it's funny. So coming after Puget Sound partnerships, you know, for our survey, the team was very excited because 2.9% is higher than average response rates seen on similar kind of household surveys in recent years in the state. But, you know, maybe someday we can get such a high response rate like in Puget Sound. But anyway, so we did a lot of community outreach during about starting a year before the survey launched. And we really think that did help increase the response rate. And so let's see quickly the map on the right here. So those green dots show the location of survey respondents. So you can see we got responses from across the region. And finally, just want to note that survey data was weighted to adjust for overrepresentation of certain groups compared to their proportions in the full Delta population. And the summary report, which we'll provide a link to later, has all the details on the methodology and these analyses. So now, yeah, next slide. But now I'm going to briefly go over some of the key survey results. And just in the interest of time, I'm not going to be going over each survey section. So for quality of life, we see that overall, 59% of residents are satisfied or very satisfied with their quality of life in the Delta. But we see that this is lower than the life satisfaction seen for the US population on average. So we also saw what residents value about this region. So the majority, for example, value the Delta's scenic beauty and outdoor recreational opportunities. But we really saw varying concerns and values among the urban versus the rural residents, for example. So quickly, I want to pause here and just note, I'm not going to talk in detail about the urban versus rural results, but just that those differences were analyzed for key survey questions across the whole survey and are presented in short research briefs that are available at that link I shared. Okay, so for the graphic on the right-hand side here, so we also heard about what people think are the biggest challenges to their well-being. So many residents had similar concerns about major challenges, such as aging infrastructure, traffic and limited transit options, and the affordability of basic needs. And so on that last point, it really shows that social inequality is apparent in this region, because more than 1/4 of respondents said that affordability of basic needs like housing, food, healthcare is a major challenge to their quality of life. So yeah, just understanding these challenges and what residents value about the region, you know, as I think we all understand, is just really important context for agencies to understand. Next slide, please. So risk and resilience to environmental and climate changes. So we also heard about residents' experiences with and concerns about these different hazards. We heard about their adaptive capacity to address those hazards and their support for various adaptation options. So I'll start with, on the left here, the support for the various adaptation options. So we saw that the majority of residents did support the state funding more sustainable agriculture and also increasing land for habitat restoration. So that was interesting to see that, but the rest of the policy options did not get majority support. So just as one example, I would say we weren't very surprised that a pretty small percentage of residents said they would support paying the annual fee to reduce their risks. Okay, and then moving on to the right here. So for adaptive capacity, the survey asks whether residents have access to a list of resources that are important for responding to climate change and other environmental hazards. So really a index was developed for adaptive capacity just by totaling the number of resources that each respondent said they have access to. So the map on the slide here shows the average adaptive capacity score for each census tract across the region. So dark blue really indicates lowest adaptive capacity, and yellow means highest adaptive capacity. So as you can see from this map, adaptive capacity really varies by geography. And we saw that it also varies by socioeconomic and demographic characteristics. So just as one example, we saw that low-income residents and people of color had significantly lower adaptive capacity than other populations. Next, please. Okay, so for civic engagement and perceptions of good governance, I want to note that this part of the survey was offered as an optional additional survey section, and that was really done to keep the main survey under about 20 minutes for people to take. So some of the highlights, so we see that Delta residents' involvement in community groups is pretty similar to, but a little bit lower than the US average. So 45% of Delta residents participate in at least one community group, but that's compared to 57% of US residents. And that's a number from a 2017 Pew Research Center poll. So the survey also asked about who residents trust to make decisions in the best interest of the Delta. So we saw that a majority of respondents say they trust scientific experts, local residents, and community advisory groups more than they trust policymakers across local, state, and federal levels. So I would say we were very interested to see that pretty high level of trust of scientists and scientific experts. And again, all this information is just really important for agencies like mine to understand. So just, yeah, for example, it makes sense, but knowing that residents trust community groups and community leaders more than state agency staff, for example, just really underscores the importance of working with community groups for agencies like mine on outreach campaigns, for example. Okay, next slide. So yeah, how are we using survey results? So at the Delta Stewardship Council, we've started to use survey results to inform our work, but we definitely still need to do more work to really dive in more and further integrate it across more of our work going forward. So just a couple examples. So right now we're developing a climate change adaptation plan for the Delta. So as part of this, we previously developed a social vulnerability index to identify the communities that are most socially vulnerable to various climate hazards. That was done using publicly available data. And the smallest spatial scale for that was at the census block group level. But now, we can really use Delta resident survey data to supplement that or add to that. So for example, the data on people's adaptive capacity and just lots of other relevant survey results. And then, one more example is just that there's a lot of important data that should inform how we do outreach and engagement. So when we update our next public participation plan, we'll definitely be looking to survey results. So as one example, so the survey also asked people what the biggest barriers are to their engagement in Delta issues. And the top barriers that people reported were lack of time, residents believing that their input won't have an impact, and not knowing where or how to get involved. So looking at the time here. So next slide, I'll try to wrap it up. Yeah, so a few follow-ups. We're working with one of our partners to mail postcards to all survey respondent addresses while maintaining confidentiality. But it'll look like something on the slide here just to make sure they know that the results are available and how they can learn more. And then a quick plug, we're also working with California Sea Grant to hire a new social science extension specialist for the Delta to really build on this survey effort and do more social science research for the region. And that job posting should be posted very soon. So yeah, please go check it out. And then, yeah, we're aiming to repeat the survey about every 3 to 4 years if possible. And just as kind of noted in the beginning, eventually we want to develop social indicators for the Delta. So yeah, just so we can really start to measure human well-being over time. And next slide, but also we're done. And yeah, I think we're going to hand it over to Sasha for SFVP.
Thanks, Annie. And I will very quickly give a brief overview of some of the San Francisco Estuary Partnership's social science efforts. So let me share my screen. All right. So first, I want to talk about our efforts to institutionalize social science into the CCMP, the Comprehensive Conservation and Management Plan, which we call the Estuary Blueprint. So we're kind of early in this stage and drawing a lot of inspiration from Puget Sound. So over the past year, we hired a social science advisory team, which consisted of academics and consultants who had expertise in social science in the region to review the Estuary Blueprint. And so they looked at the overall content of the blueprint, the process for creating the blueprint, and each of the individual actions and tasks in the blueprint, and developed a really comprehensive report that we'll be presenting to our implementation committee this fall to provide recommendations to really start changing the blueprint in the next iteration to make it really more reflective of the social ecological connections that promote good management of the estuary. So some of the human dimensions themes that social science advisory team highlighted in the blueprint were equity and environmental justice, climate change resilience and adaptation, identity and sense of place, governance and representation, and human health and well-being. And each of these themes really has a place in almost every, if not every action in the blueprint that's recommended in the blueprint. And so the social science advisory team looked at where these different themes where different actions or tasks related to these themes should be added to the blueprint too. So one of the actions in our estuary blueprint is related to wetland monitoring. And part of my role at the Estuary Partnership is as a program manager for the San Francisco Estuary Wetlands Monitoring Program. And so as part of that program, we have work groups focused on different aspects of the science. One of the work groups is called the People in Wetlands Work Group, and they're developing the scientific indicators and metrics, like what we actually measure and how we'll measure it, for the ways that people interact with and benefit from wetlands in the Bay Area. And so some of the information, the questions that data will answer are the benefits that wetlands provide equitably distributed? Where are there gaps in public access? And even like, what are the features that different groups identify as being important for public access? Are the people who make decisions about wetlands demographically representative of the Bay Area? Who visits wetland sites? What are they doing there? And what factors promote a sense of belonging and participation in stewardship activities at wetlands for people from a range of different demographic groups? So our approach to answering these questions, it varies. It's a really mixed methods approach, but in general, we're really prioritizing kind of participatory research. We'll be partnering with community-based organizations to conduct surveys and to do different methods of collecting this information. So I think that will be a really fun and interesting approach. And that's it. Short and sweet. So we have 3 minutes for questions.
Great. Thanks so much, Sasha, Rachel, and Annie for your presentations. I think Stacy is just getting ready to hop off, but before, if she's still on here, she has the question about for all of the presenters. Let me find where it was. Where did it go? So for all the speakers thus far, how do you incorporate input from Indigenous or First Nations groups with interests in your respective bodies of water to set and steer research or management priorities? Anybody that wants to hop in?
I can just say that in the San Francisco Bay, we don't have any federally recognized tribes, which is a big challenge for their capacity because they're not eligible for federal funds for tribes. But we do have a lot of efforts to build relationships with tribes and tribal serving organizations. And for example, in the Wetlands Regional Monitoring Program, we have 2 people representing tribes and tribal organizations from on our steering committee. But I think we still have a long ways to go in terms of building sustainable relationships because the tribes in our region are stretched really thin across a lot of different priorities, and interacting with us isn't necessarily always their first priority.
I'll also say from our perspective, this is something that we have been interested in, but I think in past efforts, it has been difficult to get, seminal input into some of our projects and their participation. And, we want to be very respectful of, their interests and the things that they want to add feedback on. So it is something that we are interested in pursuing further. We're working with several local anthropologists on thinking about, processes of Indigenous engagement with the tribes in the area. But it's something that's basically sort of, on the horizon for us, more so than a current established practice.
I'll add
Yeah, I'll
very
add.
quickly.
Oh, go ahead.
Very, very quickly. I mean, this is a common theme. This is something we are very interested in as well. I'll speak for the social science research program. Having established initial contact with a group of social scientists who are interested in working with us, I'm going to use that as a stepping stone to build those relationships, which we want to and would like to really think through how research can not only support Indigenous researchers, but also Indigenous partners who can help shape those research agendas. So it is a work in progress for us that I'd like to really think through in this process as well. Thank you for that question, Sarah.
Yeah, similar answer for us in the Bay Delta or in the Delta region, where there's, from a state perspective, there's like a formal consultation process. And then the work that goes so beyond that, I think is still in the early days with a lot of relationship building. And we have our internal social science integration team, but we also have a full internal team here at the council that's focusing specifically on interweaving traditional knowledge and understanding what that looks like for agencies. And we're actually next year we'll be releasing a couple of different documents and publications about just like I think it's been about a 3-year journey now of doing our own research and understanding of what it means to meaningfully engage and interweave more traditional knowledge with Western or mainstream sciences. And I'll just put a plug, Shoko Shimbrat, who's on the call right now. Maybe Shoko, you can put your email in the chat. Shoko is leading a lot of those efforts and how we integrate and inform the research by social science methods, like different, just engaging with tribes is different from social science research, but how we can actually bring those 2 together is also something we're thinking about. So yeah, agree. Thanks for the question.
I think +1 to a lot of, especially what Rachel just shared, there are 14 federally designated tribes in the Puget Sound region. And so there are, requirements to engage with them on the development of planning materials that the partnership does. not too dissimilar from how they would engage with other levels of government with which they work or agencies with which they work. And then there's a lot of intention behind better incorporating Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous sciences in the work that the partnership does, but I think a little more nascent, I'll say. And then I dropped a resource in the chat, which is these, oh, and I misspelled Swinomish. Let me correct that in the chat. It's the Swinomish Tribes Indigenous Health Indicators, since we've had so much great conversation about human well-being indicators today.
Great. Thanks so much, Stacy, for your question. I will say it's past 12 o'clock, so folks are free to go, and I want to be respectful of your time. We do have, I think all of the slides today had contact information for all of our speakers, so if you have more questions that you would like to ask folks, please, I'm sure, feel free to send them an email, and hopefully, they will get back to you. And I want to thank all of the speakers that we had today. It was very exciting getting to hear all of the different social science initiatives from all stages of integration and implementation out there. And I hope this is just the start of this big conversation across regions about how we can better integrate the social sciences into the work that we're all doing and the broader scientific community. So thank you again, everyone, for joining. Happy National Estuaries Week. For those in Florida, please stay dry, stay safe. And if you're watching this asynchronously, I hope you have also fared well. And thank you for coming back to watch the recording that you missed. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your week.
Thank you, everyone.